My name is Rafael, you watch Workout Garage, and today I'm going to show you 5 guitarists who influenced the legendary Black Sabbath co-founder and guitarist, the Riffmaster Tony Iommi. But first, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Well, the first one that we selected that Iommi praised and said was an influence to him over the decades were actually 2, and these 2 go together because of an album they recorded that was fundamental to Iommi's development as a guitarist, and they are Eric Clapton and John Mayall, because of that classic album that Eric Clapton recorded with the Blues Breakers and John Mayall. And he was that album was really influential. And the interesting things that Iommi said, that at first he didn't like Clapton in Cream, but then he got used to the sound. And he talked a little bit more about that, the influence of that album and that way of playing in an interview with The Herald in 2018. And this is what he said: "There was a Zeppelin in Cream. I liked Eric Clapton, and we'd done a few gigs in the early days with John Mayall, who I really liked. I liked the blues played on a more modern sounding guitar," which was Clapton, of course. "That was sort of the way we went, only coming up with more doomy stuff." Quite doomy, right? But John Mayall was a fantastic and fundamental guitarist, and he sadly passed away last year. And Eric Clapton played with the Yardbirds and then went to John Mayall Band, formed Cream, the first, many people say he was the first supergroup in rock and roll history, and then had a Derek and the Dominoes incredible album with that band he formed. Blind Faith as well. He formed Blind Faith with Ginger Bacon and Steve Winwood later on. And of course, he had a really successful solo career. But interesting also about John Mayall and the Blues Breakers is that besides Clapton, other musicians who were played with the band, or the famous artists, were Jack Bruce, who would later become Eric Clapton's bandmate in Cream. He was a bassist and singer. Peter Green, who was the guitarist and singer of Fleetwood Mac in the early days of the band. Mick Fleetwood, who would be the drummer for Fleetwood Mac and the co-founder of the band. John McAfee, also from Fleetwood Mac. And Mick Taylor, who later on would become one of the greatest guitarists the Rolling Stones ever had. And the second one that Iommi already said was an influence, and probably one of his biggest influences, the biggest influence, after his tragic accident when it was the last day, if you don't know the story, it was Iommi's last day of work at a factory. And he didn't used to do this to cut steel, and he had to put the steel into a machine that would cut it. And it was really the final day of his work. It wasn't something that he used to do. And when he put the steel in the machine, it chopped the point of his 2 middle fingers, and he thought it was the end for it. He thought he would never play guitar again. And Django Reinhardt was probably the biggest inspiration for him after this. After this accident, Iommi lost the tips of the middle and ring fingers of his right hand, and he recalled in his autobiography, which is fantastic. If you're a fan of Black Sabbath and Iommi, you should read it. It's a fantastic book, which is called Iron Man: My Journey Through Heaven and Hell with Black Sabbath. It was released in 2011. And he said that he only didn't give up playing the guitar because of his old boss, who gave him a record of Django Reinhardt, who didn't use the 4th finger, the ring finger, and the 5th finger, the little finger, to play after he was badly burned in an accident. This accident made Iommi create homemade thimbles to his injured fingers to extend and protect them. He used them to this day. You can see him playing with kind of like, it seems like a plastic thing, but obviously it's another material these days. And he also changed the guitar tuning so he could easily play. And this combination obviously contributed to the birth of heavy metal. I mean, if you think about it, maybe if this accident had never happened, Black Sabbath's sound maybe wouldn't have been the same. So it's quite surreal to think that an accident like that might have contributed to the creation of heavy metal music. I mean, Iommi would be the Riffmaster anyway, but maybe it would have sounded a little different. In an interview with Steve Newton back in 1984, Iommi talked about Django's Reinhardt influence, and this is what he said. Django Reinhardt's playing, I particularly related to him because he did the same thing. He only had 2 fingers, and that's really what got me cracking on, pushing myself to play. So thank God that Iommi's boss knew Django Reinhardt's music and gave it to Iommi at the time and told him the story. Thank God for that boss. You know, the greatest boss of all time, for sure. And the next one that Iommi praised over the years was Hank Marvin, maybe the most important guy from the Shadows, an essentially instrumental band that was really, really influential, a British band who influenced many other guitarists, not only Iommi, but David Gilmour, Mark Knopfler, and many others from that era of British music. And he said that Hank Marvin was his biggest inspiration when he was learning to play the guitar. And he said this in an interview with Gibson TV back in 2020 that we transcribed, and this is what he said. They were probably the biggest instrumental band in England at the time, the Shadows. Cliff Richard was the singer, and they used to back him, but they also did instrumentals, which for me was great because I could try and learn the instrumentals. It was something to learn, so I used to listen to the radio and they did the top 20 countdown. I would wait until they come on and tape them. Then I would try to learn to play. And he was a fundamental, Hank Marvin was a fundamental inspiration for many guitarists, not on Iommi. And Iommi was curiously part of a tribute album called Wonderful Land, which was the name of a song by the Shadows. I'm sorry, I got messed up here. The tribute album released in 1996 called Twang, a tribute to Hank Marvin and the Shadows. Iommi was part of this album, and he covered the track Wonderful Land, which is a famous song by the Shadows. So he had the chance to be part of that album. And I already mentioned it, Mark Knopfler and David Gilmour, but look at this. The other guitarists already said they were influenced a lot by the Shadows. Ritchie Blackmore from the Purple Rainbow, Brian May from Queen, Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, Steve Stevens from Billy Idol, Peter Frampton, Randy Bachman from Bachman Turner Overdrive and the Guess Who, Neil Young, Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac, and Andy Summers from The Police. And they also played on that record, this tribute, Twang, a tribute to Hank Marvin and the Shadows. Great album. If you haven't listened to, go check it out. And the final one that we selected, and it's probably one that influenced, most of the guitarists from those early years of rock and roll, Chuck Berry, one of the godfathers of rock and roll music, one of the first real rock and roll musicians. And Iommi talked about him in an interview with Liz Barnes in 2021. And this is what he said. I really wanted to be a drummer initially, but of course the house I lived in was very tiny. There was no way my parents would buy me a kit of drums. I would have nowhere to put them for a start. I sort of took the guitar and I really enjoyed the thought of having a guitar. so I could just sit in the bedroom, practice and play. I sort of got into rock and roll listening to Chuck Berry and all the old rockers. And this is what he said about Chuck. Chuck was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986 by Keith Richards, who was also a big fan of him, the Rolling Stones co-founder and guitarist and songwriter. And Keith, there's an interesting thing that Keith said about Chuck in his speech. He said, I lifted every lick he ever played. And that's true. Most of those guitarists from those eras to this day are playing what people like Chuck Berry played in those early years of rock and roll music, and they were fundamental to the evolution of rock and roll. You know, I think much more than Elvis, for example, who influenced a lot of people. But I mean, imagine rock and roll without Chuck Berry, without Little Richard and many others. It's just unthinkable. And that's it. I hope you like the list. I hope you like the video. Please like the video, leave your comment, subscribe, and if you want to read more and read all the interviews, all the stuff we wrote, there's much more than what I said in this video, so you can go to description and visit the article we wrote about it. Okay, don't forget to visit rockandrollgarage.com. Thank you for watching, and I see you later.